things in this video. 1, how to make butter tarts. 2, about the 1971 Gaspé Manifesto about the status of playwriting in Canada. So first, the butter tarts. I'm going to use this recipe that has been in this scribbler of my mother's since the 70s, but I'm going to use that for the filling. For the pie crust, our family uses Martha Stewart's Perfect Pie Crust. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a cup of butter, which is 2 sticks of butter, and the trick is to make sure that they're really, really cold, because it's the cold fat from the butter in the pastry that makes it so good. So here's what we do. We're going to cut the butter into hunks. I'm going to cut it up teeny tiny, like that. Put it on a plate.
Let's talk Manifesto.
Oh, little tiny teeny pieces.
Its formal name was A Strange Enterprise, The Dilemma of the Canadian Playwright in Canada.
Little chunks, little chunks. Chunks, chunks, chunks.
The meeting took place in Gaspé, Quebec in July of 1971. It was hosted by David Gardner, who was the theatre officer for the Canada Council at the time. There were 11 members of the theatre scene in the collective and one guy from Minnesota, and they were people like dramaturgs or theatre managers or playwrights like Carol Bolt, George Riga, Tom Hendry, and Jack Gray.
I'm going to take these and put them in the freezer. Crash, crash, crash. Just nestle them right in there. And then while those are freezing, chilling down, I'm going to get my dry ingredients together. Okay, dry ingredients. Martha wants 2.5 cups of flour. So, how do you do flour? You're going to scoop it and level it and then sift it. I know, it's a thing, but it does make the pastry lighter and fluffier. So I'm going to bring you in and show you how to do that.
This group was chosen and brought together because they had a unique perspective on how Canadian plays were faring in the Canadian theatre landscape. And the goal was really to figure out ways that Canadian playwrights could be better supported so that they could do the work of creating a Canadian repertoire, a body of work. And they were really not saying anything different than Roberts and Davies had 20 years ago, that support was money and support was production. And so that was really the work of the weekend. Okay.
Teaspoon each of salt and sugar. Next thing you're going to do is sift these all together using, you can use like this fancy thing, your grandma probably has it that twists it around, but I just use a sieve. Okay, in a campaign to normalize making a mistake and being able to correct it, I'm going to switch to this sieve with bigger holes because this one is too fine and it will take forever to do this. Okay, there we go, much better.
David Gardner was quoted as saying that the purpose of the weekend was first to bitch, then to make some clear recommendations to the Canada Council to take to the government.
There. That means the flour's light and fluffy and the sugar and the salt are mixed in.
Another tip is to tidy as you go so that you don't have a big mess at the end of your baking adventure. So let's talk about the document's central argument, which was that Canadian plays needed a lot of support in order to create a repertoire that Canadian theatres could use. And we've heard this before, and we'll hear it again. In 1980, the Applebaum-Hubert Commission will be formed to report on Canadian arts and culture, and a recommendation will be incentive grants for new Canadian works. Okay, tidied up, ready to go.
So Martha's recipe asks you to use a food processor, which is great and fast and easy, but if you don't have a food processor, you can cut the butter, cold butter, into your flour with knives or with a pastry cutter. But I'm going to use this. So I'm going to put my flour in, like that. I'm going to get my cold butter and some water out here. You need ice cold water for this project. So here's some ice cold water and my very, very, very cold butter for the next step. Little chunks of butter, probably about this many to begin with, and then pulse, close it up, pulse. And then the butter will break up into little tiny pieces and start creating a dough. All right, so I'm gonna do this now.
Hi, buddy.
Here is what's inside. Analogy. So here we go. Here is what's inside. You got these little pebbly, soft sand chunks. Next up, you just put a little bit of water in at a time, like a tiny little bit. It's all about making it into a dough. It'll like come together kind of in a ball. A little bit more, ice cold, 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 cold. So Martha says a quarter cup of cold, cold, ice cold water, but sometimes a little bit more. Because pastry is both a science and wizardry. We're gonna get it looking more like this. Chunky, like it sticks together, right? Yeah, like it's gonna hold together in a dough. This feels good to me. This isn't quite all of it. All of the water. Okay. Saran wrap. Get all your chunks out. And using the saran wrap and your hands, form it into a disc. Oh, a little bit broke there. Now, this doesn't mean after we've chilled it we won't need to add a little water or a little flour, but this is the general way you make the dough. Pastry is best worked with cold, so while we are going to make the filling, we will keep our pastry in the fridge.
Well, I took a break. It started to rain.
Hi, that's Ray. Okay, so we're gonna make the filling using the recipe from my mom's scribbler from the 1970s. It's from Homemaker's Magazine, I've just discovered. And we need 3 cups of brown sugar. So, that's a lot of brown sugar. It also calls for half a pound of melted butter. So a big block of butter like this is 1 pound. Old-fashioned recipes, old-fashioned measurements. So I'm gonna hack that in half-ish. I'm gonna cut it into 4 big pieces like that. Okay. Yeah, that's about right. Smush in any of the butter that isn't quite melted. The next weird thing we have to do is they want 3/4 of a cup of breadcrumbs. Just a bit weird. But I'm gonna trust this 1970 recipe. So here are some crumbs we had in the freezer, leftover from Thanksgiving. And then a cup of cream. Now they call it cereal cream in here, which leads me to believe that people in the 70s put cream on their cereal, which makes me a little bit nervous. Anyway, here's a big old cup of cream. And then we're supposed to let that soften together. Fine with me. So we're going to stir the butter into the brown sugar.
Okay, a little brown sugar ASMR as I tell you about the recommendations. There were 7. The first, CanCon, Canadian content, granting bodies like Canada Council would be encouraged to favor Canadian plays. 2, that by 1973, companies would be producing 50% Canadian plays every season. And then the third was guaranteed income for playwrights, which was unlikely, but hey, shoot your shot.
So that's all stirred in. Next, we are going to add 3 eggs. Now, the best way to do this is to beat them up and add them in one at a time. Oh, that's not too hot. It won't cook the eggs. Okay, one. We're going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla to this. Stir. Finally, the weird breadcrumb mixture. So I'm going to go in.
Okay, recommendation 4, short-term production grants to support smaller one-off productions of Canadian plays and performances. And 5, encouraging theater companies and universities to have a playwright or dramaturg in residence, which would support artists and improve the quality of the repertoire.
Tart contents. Okay, I'm going to take off my rings and roll out the pastry dough. So you want to let the pastry come out of the fridge for a little bit so it's easy to work with. Warm it up with your hands like this. Now, rolling pastry dough out, you know, it's fine. You need some flour so it won't stick to the countertop.
So the last 2 recommendations. Recommendation 6 was a call for the automatic publication of any play that had been professionally produced in Canada, Canadian play, and second, a professional organization for playwrights that was separate from the performance unions that had already been established.
Yeah, might break apart. Might need some more water. As I said, pie dough is wizardry.
So remember, these largely remained recommendations. Massey Commission included very few of Davy's suggestions in their report either.
This ice cream glass to create my rounds. Gently lift them up. Oh, it's ripping. Rawr. Okay, and then settle it in the muffin tin. Don't press it down too hard kind of like frill the edges a little bit.
So the collective wants funds first to make sure writers are getting supported in their writing, and then second, that theaters are able to present this work to audiences. The group is also advocating for quantity. So let's get lots and lots of plays written, different genres and stories and kinds, and then the quality will follow. The idea is to generate content, generate lots and lots of content, and then edit it down into a repertoire. So kind of like writing an essay. Generate all your ideas, write and write and write, and then carve it out so it makes sense. And voila.
Ready for some controversy? Adding raisins to your butter tarts and the 50% Canadian rule. The 50% Canadian rule, or the priority Canadian recommendation, was a massive bombshell after the Gaspé recommendations came out. And there were theaters like the Manitoba Theatre Centre who refused to adhere to the rule well into the 80s. Much like I refused to adhere to the recipe, and I will not put raisins in these butter tarts. So we fill the tarts 3/4 of the way. Now, tidy up your tray so that you don't get burning sugar happening in your oven. Okay, I will concede that if you want to, nuts are pretty good in a butter tart. I'm not going to put them in all of them, but I think you can put nuts in if you want a little crunch. Okay, oven's hot, and we're going to put it in. The recipe says from 18 to 20 minutes. So I'm going to set my timer for 18 minutes and then check back.
All right, let's reflect while I do the washing up. It is a little hard to assess what the tangible effects of all these rules were. The Canada Council's official position, literal official position, was endorse, not enforce. That's how Manitoba Theatre Centre got away with it. But the manifesto itself created enough controversy at the time that it pushed the issue, and it's acknowledged as being like a clear step in the development of Canadian drama and theatre. The Playwrights Guild of Canada was established in 1972. That's a direct link to the recommendations. And we've discussed the flurry of mandates for Canadian drama and stories that were happening in the Toronto theatre scene in the early 70s. So I think it had an effect. Do you think it did?
Okay, my timer's gone off. I had to add 2 minutes. So here they are. Bubbly, bubbly. Right out of the oven. So they're done. To sum up, 1, you want really, really cold butter to make pastry. And 2, the Gaspé Manifesto's 50% recommendation was a controversial but ultimately helpful step towards supporting Canadian playwrights. Yeah, good. Mom, could you help me?